Now for the color blocking stage, I'm using an angle brush, and I'm going to be picking up some of the lightest color, the very first color I made for the lightest parts of the wave with the sunshine sort of illuminating it. It has that translucent appearance to it, and I also have some Galkid light that is on my palette in this little lid from a jar, and I tend to use jar lids for my mediums a lot of times. So I'm just placing that color where I'm seeing it in the reference, and my reference was actually a super cropped image of a full image, I guess, so there was a lot more going on in that photo, but I cropped it specifically to this wave, and this reference was from one of the references I posted a couple months back. So I just wanted to paint a wave. I didn't necessarily want to paint the entire view of the ocean I was seeing. I just wanted to hone in on a wave, and because it's a super cropped image, obviously a lot of detail was lost, and so this kind of forced me to be a little freer with my brush strokes and not really meticulously detail everything, because I wasn't seeing all those crazy details. I was seeing a lot of pixelation, so I kind of had to make some of that up. And so this painting was completed much faster. For that reason, I was just much looser with my brush strokes. And I actually am happy about that, because I feel like I spend so much time just slaving away at paintings, and I don't know, I lose time, I can't move on to the next piece. And so for me right now, and especially with the Oiltober series I've been doing, it's really teaching me to let go a little and work faster, because I love to take my dear sweet time, and I realize that over the years I just take more and more time to work to finish paintings. I end up obsessing more and more over certain details, and I don't know, there is some benefit to that, I agree, but you know, it's so much more fun to just be free with your work. So now I picked up the second color. I mixed this a little bit darker green with more yellows in there, and so now I'm creating, or starting to create, this fade from the super light color into the darker greens, creating that illusion of translucency of the sunshine peeking, not peeking through, but the sunshine shining through that wave, lighting it up from the back. And it's just going to get darker and darker green until we're into the blues. The issue with filming this, unfortunately, is that much like the other examples where I have my reference up on screen, I typically use the digital file, obviously, and so the colors on my painting are really not matching up to the reference that you're currently seeing pop up on screen, unfortunately. However, as you saw when I was mixing, the colors do match, so the printed photo is a much closer match, and of course the way the camera is picking up the colors on my painting isn't truly accurate, unfortunately. So I need to figure out better ways to do that, because I would love for these things to be a great match, but I might just end up taking a photo of the actual printed photo and using that image to put up on screen, so it's a closer match to what you're going to be seeing on camera, since they're in the same lighting, they're captured in the same way. So I might try doing that, because digital files don't necessarily print the same exact way that they are on screen, and then on top of that already being different, they don't register on camera. The colors don't register on camera in my painting. So just want to clarify that, because I realize it looks so different from what you're seeing on screen and what's on my painting, but the colors do actually match. So now I've picked up the third green, and I'm moving on to some of the darker parts of the wave, just slowly creating that gradient, I guess, though it's not really a gradient, it's just the colors, they kind of get lighter, but there's little bits of light in between some of the darker shadows, so it's not necessarily a gradient, because then it wouldn't really look like a wave. But yeah, I'm just slowly making my way into the various colors that I mixed for the wave, and just placing them where I believe they should go. And now I'm moving into the fourth color I mixed, this darker green. I'm also bringing in some of the darker blue shadow colors I mixed, just to darken it up a little bit more. And I'm making my way down with some of the shadow greens I'm seeing in the reference. And as I place down these darker greens onto the painting, I'm placing them under the lighter colors I mixed, but I also slightly bring them upwards and into the lighter colors just to blend them. I also brought in a little bit of blue into that color just now. But yeah, I just kind of drag them very gently into the lighter color to blend while I paint, just to create a smoother transition so there's no harsh lines in between those colors. So I'm continuing with my darker greens. I'm placing them over some of the darker parts of the underpainting. I made some shapes with the burnt sienna using a grid to help guide the shapes, but I'm using that as a guide. You can see in the reference there's some of those jagged shadowy shapes, and then it gets into like a lighter blue. So right now I'm just placing down some of those shadowy greens using my underpainting as kind of a map of where I want these values to go. So the underpainting isn't necessarily going to tell me what colors go where, but it is more of like a value type of thing, which I can still see in my reference, and I remember what I was painting as I was creating that underpainting. And though my underpainting was kind of like a guide, it wasn't finalized details, so even though I am placing colors over the darker parts and the shapes I already created, I'm also simultaneously changing them and altering them as I feel they are needed. Now I'm putting my brush, another angle brush, into that super darkish blue I created for some of the darker shadow shapes in the waves, and you can see I'm just placing them over my underpainting shapes. And I will, so far I just want to place down these shadow colors, and then once that's mostly done, I will fill those spaces in with the lighter blues I created and some of the reflections of the wave. And this is kind of in the shadow because this particular wave, the sun was near setting. It wasn't quite a sunset just yet, so it was more behind the wave than above it, and that's why it has that very soft but very prominent glow. I mean, it would still have that glow had the sun been directly above the wave, but it definitely gives a different effect when you think about which direction the light is coming from. So moving on to, again, just the rest of the painting at this point, I'm really just covering those main shadow shapes I'm seeing in the water and just leaving some of those spaces blank in between, and then I'm going to fill them in with the lighter blue. Now I'm bringing my angle brush into a slightly greener shadow, and this is for the shadows above the wave. These are a little more horizontal. They're distant, and so they appear smoother, and also I guess the pull of the water back there is creating smoother lines, not quite as harsh and jagged as the waves where it's about to crash and just underneath all that. So the movement behind, there's like a pull of the water, and that is, and also it being more distant. The more distant water is, the more horizontal and closer together those shapes are going to be, versus much more shapely up at the front. So these shadows back there are on the greener side. As I was mixing those colors in the first part, you were able to see. And so I'm just using that memory from what I was mixing those colors for to place these shadow colors down accordingly. I'm not trying to copy every single line or shadow I'm seeing exactly as is. I'm kind of creating an estimate, and I'm still inventing my own thing on the canvas, I guess. I'm just using my reference as a guide. I don't necessarily want to replicate every single detail. I don't think I would have had time. Not to mention, this specific canvas was actually damaged, so I wasn't even going to sell this painting. This is purely for decoration for our home. And yeah, I was cooler with leaving something a little more painty and impressionistic, and not necessarily this perfect image, especially not on a canvas that has a hole in it. Like, if I'm gonna use my paint for meticulously detailing things, it's going to be for a canvas that's flawless and that could potentially have a painting on it that I will sell. This wasn't that. This was just a piece for fun. I didn't want this canvas to go to waste, so here we are. So yeah, not trying to make it exactly as what I'm seeing in the reference. I'm just kind of estimating my brush strokes, just as long as they follow the general direction and the sizing aligns with what I'm seeing, then I'm happy. Now I'm picking up a little bit of that Gal Kid light, and I'm going back to some of my wave colors. Picked up one of the lighter, or I guess medium greens I created for the wave, and I'm now painting the top of the wave. There are some greens there I was seeing. I like to switch my attention around as I'm working on a painting, and so while I started out with the wave, it was looking a bit weird to me, and I wanted to put a little bit of shadows in the foreground and the background just so I can have more dimension to the piece, so that when I do go back to the wave such as I did now, it just looks a little more alive to me, because I don't like focusing on a center point or a central part of a painting without having some of the rest of the image done as well. That's just not how I particularly like to paint. Also, when I do faces, a lot of times I'll also paint the rest of the body simultaneously. I'll try to create some values, at least an estimate of them, or just like a little sketch of them, I suppose, so that it's not just like a face floating on a painting with nothing around it. I like to paint a lot of things all at once and switch my attention around. I don't focus on like one little corner and detail everything and then move on to the next one. I just like to do everything all at once. So I've left the center, the very center of the wave, blank for now. That's going to have some of those bluer parts where there's a splash, but I didn't want to put any greens down. I just wanted to leave it blank for now. And now I'm slowly making my way down to some of the shadowy parts where the water is building up to the wave, not necessarily part of the wave, and some of those greens there. So I'm just now extending that downwards with the greens before moving on to the blues closer to the bottom of the image that I'm going to place in between all the darker shadow parts of the water. So I'm picking up more of those wave colors. I just added a little bit of cadmium chartreuse and radiant green just to make a bright green. And again, it looks a lot lighter on my painting than it does in the reference you're seeing, the digital file. So I will blend darker colors upwards once I get to those, but for now I'm just extending the wave downwards. The comparison I'm seeing in the digital reference file and the painting is the painting looks a little bluer as far as those greens go, and the reference, obviously there's way more yellows, so that is something that you'll see once the painting is done. Compared to my photo reference, it is a much closer match than what you're seeing. I feel like I always have to reassure you and be like, oh, I swear it matches, because it just bothers me seeing that mismatch on screen. But again, the reference is, yeah, I already explained it, so I'm just not going to keep repeating myself. So now I'm picking up some of the more shadowy blues that I created for the bottom part of the wave. And I'm going to start placing that color in between the darker shadows. I'm mixing in some Galcad light in with my paint. And as you can see, I'm just placing that into those blank spaces between the darkest shadows. And what I have on my painting, as I mentioned earlier, is not a perfect 100% accurate match. It's more of an estimate, an impression, if you will. I'm just trying to get it look close enough with as little obsessing as possible, and just trying to fill in those blank spaces. Once the entire underpainting is covered, that's when I can really finalize things, but I just need to get to a point where all the colors need to be where they need to be. And then the painting will look a little bit more complete to me, and then from there I can just tweak things, build on the details, and fix whatever needs fixing. And the other thing I'm doing right now for this tutorial is I'm trying out leaving more blank spaces where I'm doing something super consistent, so I don't have to put a time lapse on it and you still get realistic or real-time footage, not necessarily sped up. And obviously I don't have a whole lot to say if I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and I've already explained it. So I'm going to be leaving some blank spaces in this painting footage where it's like obviously self-explanatory. There's not really a whole lot I could say, not like I can describe each individual shape, because I really can't. And then I've been putting a title that shows you when, if you want to skip to the next voiceover, you can do so at whatever timestamp. Let me know if that works for you guys, if you prefer that, because I don't want to just babble and fill the silence with useless chattering if there's no value in it. And as I make more of these tutorials, I find myself having a bit less to say because I've already said so much in prior prior tutorials. And even though I do repeat myself a lot, it's mainly because there are a lot of consistencies in my process, and I've learned that along the way as I make these videos. I always thought everything was super intuitive and random, but in reality there are consistencies in how I work, and it's actually helped me understand my own method and my own process better and improve on it. So making these videos for you actually helps me at the same time. So yeah, let me know if you like just leaving some of those blank areas in the video, because I actually enjoy doing it that way, and it's more convenient for me. I can make more videos a lot faster, so I think I might try this out in a few more videos. As you can see, there's quite a bit of a harsh contrast with between the darker blues and the lighter greens of the waves, so that's what I'm fixing right now, and I'm bringing in a little bit more of the blue into the wave and just blending it upwards to create a softer transition so that it doesn't look quite so harsh. Now that most of the darker parts of the wave and the darker blues are completely covering the underpainting, I'm going back to the wave, bringing in some more of the lighter greens and just blending things out a little bit more, covering some more of the underpainting and trying to get things to look a little bit more right, and then also bringing in those greens into some of the blues and just extending them downwards in a little bit here because as you can see, there is still a bit of a blank space there in the wave. And if you look at the reference, you can see there's a bit of a lighter green reflection going on in that specific section of the wave, or underneath the wave, I guess. So that's what I'm placing down now, those lighter greens that are reflecting off the wave. And I think it was just some of the lighter splashy bits, and maybe some of the greens. I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to figure out why that specific area is lighter in that specific part. I think there's also a little bit of bubbles going on there, which helps. So yeah, and again, colors are mismatched, sadly, from the digital reference to what you're seeing in the painting footage, but I promise you they match. So at this point, I'm just adding a little bit more wave details to those darker blue areas and just trying to get it to look more shapely, because as I did fill in those lighter blues in between the darker blues, some of the darker blues, which were details, actually got lost and blended. So just kind of filling in more spaces, blending things together, and now I'm about to move upwards to the background with the much lighter blues. I'm just continuing to add some more of greens to the blues, some of the greens being reflected in that part of the wave. Now I'm picking up some of the very lightest blue that I mixed for the wave, and I'm mixing a little bit of Galkid light into that color, and I'm just placing it down in the background in the lighter parts of the wave. It's like a bluish green. I will correct that as I paint, but something similar to what happened with the bottom part where I was filling in the spaces is the shadows I place down kind of get covered over, which is okay because I can, I ended up going back and repainting some of those dark shadows, but right now I'm just trying to place down whatever light blue I can into those empty spaces just to get that whole area covered so it looks more real, because so far that's the thing that's holding me back from seeing a full wave here, is just that blank burnt sienna underpainting peeking through, and once it's covered it's going to make a huge difference. At this point, I'm bringing in a little bit of titanium white and phthalo blue to make a bluer blue, because what I had down was a little bit greener. And so because there's varying areas, varying blues in different areas, it's not all just one solid color. That just never happens with realism. Certain areas of a painting are going to have more blue or green, particularly in this wave. So at the top I was seeing more blues, and that's why I brought in some titanium white and phthalo blue, just to get things to be a little bit more accurate. And as you can see, I'm slowly kind of going over some of the dark shadows as I'm trying to paint in between them, which is okay. Like, I don't mind. This is a better option in my opinion than covering that entire background with the light blue paint, and then going over it with the dark paint, because then you're just going to be blending it. You're never going to get those truly dark colors. So I'd rather have some already there and then just go over them again if I happen to cover them. So now that I have all of that underpainting covered with the lighter blues, I'm now going back over it with my shadowy colors to just re-emphasize some of those darker bits with the horizontal lines emphasizing the pull of the water since some of the dark parts got covered, and that's okay as long as most of them are still there. Some of the darkest parts didn't actually get covered over. I'm just putting a little bit more detail into those shapes and emphasizing or portraying that pull of the water. And it's fine if it got painted over with the light blue. I could just go back over, and as you can see, it actually creates these very soft blends, so it's not that bad because the colors I had originally were perhaps a little bit too dark, but to me this is looking a lot better. So I just kept on going over this and just randomly, not randomly, following my reference, placing lines down, or squiggle and like bent lines, I guess, where I was seeing them in my reference, but not completely exactly to the T trying to recreate it and copy the photo, but just an estimate, just to portray it as closely as possible, while still maintaining some loose brush strokes and more painterly aspects of it. So skipping forward slightly here, when I've already done some of that work, you can see it looks a whole lot more like water now. And now I'm going back to my light blue and just repainting certain areas. I was seeing a little bit of burnt sienna peeking through because the layer was slightly transparent. So now I'm just going back with a lighter blue and going over some areas. I brought in a little bit of extra titanium white, and I'm just placing down some highlights. The paint is all still wet, so it's not very harsh. They're very subtle, but I'm just adding little bits of highlight to the waves in the background there, just to create that illusion of light being reflected and different height of the water. So that is basically part one of this wave painting color blocking. As you can see, I still left a piece of the center point a little bit to the left blank. The underpainting is still peeking through, but that's because I'm going to place a lighter blue over that area for the splash of the wave. I just didn't want to do that right now. I just kind of left the painting as is. Didn't want to have to paint over the green spots, and I don't know, I think I just wasn't feeling it at the time. So that is coming later in the next part. But I hope you enjoyed this painting demonstration. Hopefully you found it helpful, at least a little bit. I love sharing my work with you guys, and thank you so much for watching.